I have with me here on the stage two of the finest chroniclers of the modern Indian psyche. Pavan Varma, to my right, bureaucrat, author, translator, a renaissance man in many ways, great party animal also. And we have Ashis Nandy, India's foremost polymath, historian, sociologist, psychologist, psychologist, right? I mean, he's studied all kinds of things, a student of all kinds of things, and a mentor to many of our finest scholars in India. The subject we're going to try and grapple with is a subject that's pretty ungrappleable, which is the Indian. You know, I mean, I would say arguably the most mysterious beast in the world at present. I've spent all my life in India. I didn't go abroad to study, I didn't go abroad to work. I lived here all my 48 years, and I can tell you I understand India and Indians less and less as the years go by. So we're going to start with Pavan Varma, who's actually written books on middle-class Indians, on being Indian. India is a country that's impacted by 300 years of colonialism, 1,000 years of feudalism, a very ancient civilization, brought into the modern world through extraordinary acts of vision into the world of liberal democracy, and grappling with all these layers of caste, layers of religion, multi-histories. What is this Indian, and how should we read the Indian and the India's contemporary story? I'm going to get Pavan first to tell us a little bit about it from his own writings and his own studies, and then we'll go to Ashish to respond to some of the ideas that Pavan puts forward.
Thank you, Tarun. You know, it seems easy to describe people as inscrutable. And certainly people who are products of ancient civilizations which go back to the dawn of time are in many ways like the onion, where there are layers upon layers as part of one psyche. And I've often said that Indians are harmonious schizophrenics because they can effortlessly live on two planes. But I think, let me answer your question by saying that we are an old civilization but a young nation. And I believe that the current phase that we are passing through is especially crucial because I want to call it the twilight zone. And I think every trait and characteristic that we have will be brought to a new challenge in this twilight zone unless we understand the importance of that transition. 1947 brought us to a certain phase, to a certain degree of development. And I believe with the cusp of the millennium, why I call it a twilight zone is because the momentum of the past, the reassurance of existing institutions, the natural hothouse propulsion of a growing and large economy, they create the illusion of normalcy. But a lot is changing, and unless we are able to grasp it, I believe that that second booster, that second revolution which will put India definitively on the high table of the world will not happen. And I believe it needs to happen in 5 areas where all the characteristics of the Indian that I have discussed so often in my books will be severely challenged. The first area is democracy. I believe the structure of democracy as it exists today, and there is much to be grateful to it about, the structure of democracy is today asphyxiating the spirit of democracy. And we need to be very, very vigilant in thinking about it. How elections are conducted, the use of money and muscle power to which Indians either collude, benefit or gripe, the absence of inner party democracy, the conduct of our parliamentary debates, the hegemony of personal fiefdoms, all of this are actually antithetical to the spirit of democracy. And we need to take a call on this. The second issue, and that is critical, is governance. We have the world's largest corpus of good laws and the poorest record of implementation. And this is something we need to grapple with. We have to ask ourselves this seminal foundational question. Is talent incompatible with democracy? Is stability of governance incompatible with democracy? Can we deliver or not? Because the day your growth rate falls below 6%, Tarun, this whole demographic dividend that we talk about
will become a disaster.
Will unravel. So there has to be at the minimum level governance. The third area is security. Contrary to the bathos that Manishankar Iyer rightly pointed out to, which we should have, I believe the Pakistanis have read the Arthashastra better than us. Sam, Dam, Dan, Bhed, that is their policy, they have read it, whereas we, while we talking, completely forget the fact that we need, being in the world's most troubled neighborhood, we need a new mindset to security. This whole legacy of non-violence, which was the right tool to bring us freedom, has overlapped into our current phase, where with externally sponsored terrorism and homegrown terrorism, we are sitting ducks if we are not careful. The fourth area is ethics. I mean, we had a debate on Lokpal, but I can tell you, you can quantify it in economic terms, the impact of corruption and on retarded growths of the economy. Quite apart from the image of the Indian, who's very often happen to be corrupt, provided people don't know about it. So that is another matter. But the fact of the matter is that apart from the Lokpal, you need deterrence, you need better laws. It's not going to happen merely because you have a Lokpal, so you need to create a systemic change. And the last point I want to mention is that, you know, we've failed miserably in the creation of a genuinely inclusive society. All the slogans we've had, somewhere we don't notice it, a foreigner does, that essentially the successful would like to secede from this country to form their own republic. And the fact of the matter is that it's only in fantasy that you can build the first floor without taking care of the foundation and the ground floor. And that is exactly what has been the project. So I submit before you that the time has come in this twilight phase of our evolution as a nation to look at the creation of that inclusive society and deeply interrogate, corrosively interrogate the policies that we have adopted so far, including the top-down model. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked. We need what Rajan Mittal had spoken about, but that also only in part a new public-private partnership.
Ashish, Pavan's given a kind of a diagnosis at a macro level of what's wrong and where we need to go. Now, the truth of all things is that finally you have to deal with the unit, which is the human animal. And what is the human animal in India, the Indian, that becomes so resistant to a lot of the changes that he's actually talking about? For example, we know the laws exist. Every time somebody tells me about the Lokpal, I say, but you know, there's enough laws to nail corruption. It's not being nailed because we don't, it's the human animal that doesn't kick in to nail that. So in all these things, it's not as if laws don't exist. We jump the red lights not because there is no law against the red light, because that's how we are structured. We are, to use a word that he really made famous among the middle class, we use jugaad all the time, with ethics or without ethics. We know that for a fact. It's a bit like what they say about sex. Indians' attitude to success and money is about opportunity. If there's an opportunity, we will grab it. There is no morality or ethics at play. What is it? Is it a kind of underlying philosophical, religious subtext that makes us like that? Just give us a sense of the Indian animal, the human, the Indian person, and what is it that makes him so resistant to becoming an ethical being in an ethical society?
I don't think the Indians were as corrupt 40 years ago. They were corrupt, but it was within moderate limits. I don't think Indians are corrupt when they go outside India to work as much as they are in India. I think there is something wrong with the kind of system we have. This system, which makes a lot of sense to us, does not make sense to the new entrants to the system. So that which is the clue to our success, that which is the greatest achievement of this society, namely democratic governance, has become a liability because while it has released enormous energies at the peripheries and the bottom of the society, somehow or other those who are being brought into the structure or system are unable to share its values. It does not make that much sense to them. And I think that is the crux of the problem. First of all, they have the liability of centuries. I mean, somebody from a poor, underprivileged section come to power, his whole family remains poor, whole clan and caste and community remains poor, his village remains poor, and he is under desperate pressure to fulfill some of their minimum needs. Not only that, he himself is insecure that here he is enjoying power today, but if tomorrow he is displaced or loses his election, it's like a gamble. I mean, tomorrow he will be back where he was. So he wants to make money at all costs. So exactly the things which have given this democracy is vivacity, is power, are the things which also contribute to this sense of desperation in some of the new power holders. You know.
So would you, as a scholar, as somebody who studies societies, Pratap the other morning said something which I believe in also. Pratap said that in the contemporary world, in the modern world as it unfolds, particularly in India, there are only two objective ways of establishing self-worth. And the two most objective ways are money and power, devoid of hierarchies, devoid of the approval of closed societies. Does that then create a basic metabolism in a society to obsess about power and money, which is what we see, and which is what is linked to a lot of the things that you said? And is that, having said that, let's for a moment assume that's a given, does that then, in a sense, legitimize this extremely messy phase that we are currently going through and which we need to go through given the nature of our disparities?
Well, India has always been a messy society. 700,000 villages, 70,000 castes, 1,500 languages, 330 million gods and goddesses. So this has always been messy. The choice in India is not between messiness and order. It is always between manageable and unmanageable chaos.
I was trying to suggest something else to you, Ashish. Am I saying, should we then see the current phase we're going through? Well, one of the things that obsesses us is the idea of corruption, the idea of unethicality, the idea of violence, the idea of grubbing and grabbing, which we see all around us. For example, we are one of the most violent societies in the world, you know, and we practice every kind of violence known to man on a daily basis. I'm saying, given the fact that we may be going through a very complex transition where people who are born out of the areas of privilege into which all of us have been born find that the accumulation of money and power is the only way of righting the balance, of finding a place. So given that, for example, I said it I said it's unpolitic for me to say it in Bombay at a seminar recently, but even when I look at corruption, I find that corruption is often the only tool of the man who has actually been born on the wrong side of everything. He has not gone to the right schools. What? He has not been given access to the right clubs. So he has no levers to actually access the cream of society, the prizes of society. And for a man like him, who may have great intelligence and great ability to work hard, corruption is one tool to level the playing field. Is that true of India?
Yes, partly because those who are coming into politics are not part of the willing dealing systems as you and I have been. If tomorrow I am an industrialist and you are in a position to give me a license or a permission or a clearance, I can create a fellowship at Harvard, or if not Harvard, a smaller American university, to give to your son or daughter. But if you are that kind of a person, you might not have a son and daughter who can absorb it. So I have to perhaps give them 40 petrol pumps. And that looks very corrupt. That looks very corrupt. Absolutely. Whereas the first one doesn't look corrupt at all. You very proudly say to people that my son has got a fellowship to go to University of California.
No, I mean, no, there's something very important that Ashish is saying, and I'm saying this because I come from the privilege of this country. And I'm saying, you find, let me give you an even more idiotic and ironic example. For some reason in India, in every city, the finest properties and the finest clubs and golf courses are preserved for the best of our people. You can go to, for example, the Gymkhana Club in Delhi and eat dinner every night, and it'll be cheaper than eating dinner in your own house. Why is it that the most wealthy and well-off in this country are subsidized to that extent? I mean, you'd imagine it should be the other way around. So I'm saying, what is this kind of society we've created? I know people who do that. I know people who go every night to eat at the Gymkhana because it's cheaper to eat at the Gymkhana than to have to cook an entire meal at your own house. You can eat a proper meal for 75 or 80 rupees or something like that. And I'm saying there is a problem here. And I'm saying when we are so acidic about the corruptions of other people, I almost find that maybe we are missing a point here. Maybe what is being used as corruption, and look at the people who get caught in the big corruption scandals. The Madhu Kodas, the Rajas, just have a look at them. Most of these people come from the wrong side of the tracks. You and I know, and Pavan knows them probably even better, you and I know there are extremely smooth people from our class structure in Delhi whose corruptions will exceed by 100 those of the Rajas and the Kodas, but they don't get caught by the system. So I'm saying in this kind of a situation, do you think that the kind of churn we are seeing is in fact, in a historical scale, a legitimate churn?
It may not be legitimate, but it is understandable to some extent, because there is also tremendous insecurity. Pratap did mention this, I know, and I think he has a point. But you have to remember that both money and power in India is quite transient. It is not stable. The stable dynastic money of the kind we used to see earlier is becoming a thing of the past. Houses, business houses come up, they go down. The political power, today you might be in power, day after tomorrow you might be out. And everybody is insecure. Everybody wants to make money, somehow or other to buy that security. I doubt whether they need as much of money or they think they need. It is just insecurity, because you want to play politics at the highest level, and that requires a lot of money. By the way, I want to add two more points here. First of all, the vivacity and the power of Indian democracy partly depends on this floating fund of black money. I think Indian democracy will lose some of its charms because the campaign, etc., become much more boring. And indeed, I will go to the extent of also pointing out to you that the only zero corruption society I have discovered in the whole world is one, Singapore. And that's not my concept of India. That's not my concept of India. I do believe that we should be prepared for a moderate degree of corruption, not the Madhu Koda type, but a reasonable amount.
Pavan, I'll come to you on just the business of corruption since it obsesses Indians so much. Is it not true that almost everyone we know compromises, us, our families, and somebody else said that in the morning, you know, I think Sam said that, our fathers, our uncles don't pay taxes. We all at some level compromise. So what's this pathology of corruption? Two things. One, where does it come from? And second, why do we get so anxiety about it when we are all participants in it?
You see, one thing I want to say to what the other said, you see, nation building cannot be conjured on the assumed collective insecurities of individuals. Sorry.
Just speak up.
Hello, can you hear me? I was saying that nation states, and you know, we have to begin to think of ourselves as a normal nation state in terms of our aspiration. You cannot go back every time and unravel this nation and talk about this great hysteria of collective or individual insecurities. We've survived 65 years and we have a destiny ahead, and we better do the planning on that basis. The second point is, you are absolutely right that individuals, especially from the middle class, collude with corruption in the day in private and sit in their drawing rooms in the evening and vociferously complain about corruption in high places. That's the question of who gets the opportunity when. That's the great gap between public morality and private vice. That is why I've always said that in order to tackle corruption, you must first have the neutral intervention of technology. Don't leave discretion to the ordinary human Indian. You want to buy a ticket, do it online rather than need a tout to do it. Deterrence. There is nothing an Indian worries about more than loss of publicly acknowledged esteem in terms of reputation. And especially if it's reinforced by a stint in Tihar jail. You must have timely deterrence. And the third is, you will always spawn corruption if you don't have transparent regulatory mechanisms and proper laws. Without this infrastructure, please don't depend on moral exhortation to change Indians or for that matter anyone. I keep saying that Indians may be sui generis, but please don't try to build this nation state as if you are an island unto yourself. There are best practices to learn from across the world, even about money and power, Tarun. Both are legitimate goals. Why must I shy away from moving towards power because I have to adopt means which are dishonorable? Gandhiji laid this great paradigm before us for the Indian. The means are as important as the end. Actually, that has not been our legacy. Lord Krishna cheated 5 times in the Mahabharata. Every time he was reminded that the means are more important than the end, and he asked the question, do you want to win the war or do you want this moral question to be solved?
Absolutely.
My point, if that is indeed our legacy, my question to you is, can we make the means more honorable in order to achieve ends which are legitimate? This is a challenge before us, and this is something we have to tackle. We cannot keep saying that democracy cannot attract the right talent because the means are so dishonorable. And that is why I have always maintained that this whole argument about corruption, put your finger on the way democracy is practiced on the ground through electoral funding, how you raise the money. That's the core, that's the seed.
I've said that quite often too. You know, the business that at the heart of the great corruptions we grapple with is the business of electoral funding reforms.
Right.
All right, so we will leave that aside. We all agree on that. Unless we reform the electoral funding, we'll always, because you can't have an election that costs tens of thousands of crores, whereas the mandated limit is some 500 crores for the whole country. It can't happen. So there is obviously that gap is coming from somewhere. But let me come back to a far more visceral question, the business of morality. I mean, Pavan touched morality. There is a case for explaining to all of us that Hinduism and its very, very slippery idea of morality has that, in a sense, impacted the subcontinental ethic in terms of governance and the way we conduct our public lives? Because the truth is, unlike the prescriptive religions, unlike Christianity and Islam, Hinduism is not a series of do's or don'ts. At the end of the day, the volition is left to the individual. And our own classical texts show, as he showed in the case of not just Krishna, there are endless examples. The Gita itself gives, anyone can interpret the Gita from a mafia don to Gandhi. You can all interpret the Gita to justify your life. That's the extraordinary thing about the Gita. You can quote from the Gita. Would that be a case that there is a kind of subcontinental slippery ethic that actually stems from the very nature of Hinduism?
Well, I have seen such works. People have argued that way occasionally. But I must also point out to you that I have heard the same arguments from my Chinese friends who say there is something in Confucianism in the breakdown of the cultural norms in China. They claim the Chinese corruption is worse than India's, and so on and so forth. Frankly speaking, after my 35 to 40 years of study of state building, nation formation, I have come to the conclusion that state building and nation formation are intrinsically criminal activities. Only after you have built them, then you begin to establish norms, because the hierarchy stabilizes, new hierarchy stabilizes. They become more generous, more open-minded, and all through the process of building states and forming of nations, invariably there is this rhetoric of the society going to dogs. There is enormous corruption, there is so much of backstabbing everywhere, loyalties are missing, and so on and so forth. Partly because state formation and nation building require adjusting to new norms. And whether these norms are invariably something worth adjusting to or not, whether a society should be prepared to pay that price is a different issue. May I point out to you that United States was built on the world's most successful genocide ever. Absolutely. 12 million people were sacrificed, killed, American Indians, and therefore they got what in effect became a virgin territory. No, I mean, compared to that Holocaust, that genocide, the European genocide of 1940s, or the Rwandan genocide, or the Indian partition violence pales into insignificance. And I can give you example after example of that. And I have a suspicion that we are living through such times. In a sense, Pavan is right, that we are living through this, what you might call a kind of a shadowy, dark phase through which we are transiting from one set of values to another set of values. And for the moment, I doubt whether it will succeed. If Anna Hazare has his way, or Anna's team has his way, we will probably have a terrific Lokpal bill. But this, as Pavan says, that laws are aplenty in India, the implementation will be a problem. If you load the Lokpal with so much of power, I mean, the functionaries at the Lokpal, with the first targets people will try to reach out to influence the Lokpal's opinions. They will become the new beneficiaries of a coercive state.
I think one of the things we must denude ourselves, both as a society and an individual and a nation, that this hothouse kind of proliferation can go on unimaginably till the very end, and we will still sit on the high table of the world. It will not. And it is not as if we are incapable of building the right institutions or of drafting the right laws. The real problem is, and that is also part of our psyche, is that for too long we've seen the progressive distortion of the very laws and institutions we have built and have done nothing about it. We have watched it disintegrate before our eyes. We have seen the gulf between precept and practice and have allowed it to proceed till a point has come, and that is why I called it the twilight zone. Either we emerge into the sunlight, or I think we are in for difficult times.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Pavan. I think what we are seeing next year we'll give several sessions to a discussion like this. But I think what we are seeing is, in some sense, a creative challenge to an older hierarchies, as Ashish said, and older ways of doing things. And through this kind of creative challenge, I think whether we emerge in a better or a worse place remains to be seen. But in all this, as has been mentioned several times, the Indian as an animal, as a kind of cultural animal, will obviously be the key catalyst. What is it that we'll do to get things right? And we've got things right often in the past. I mean, in the last 100 years, the Indian freedom struggle remains the most creative mass act of genius. So we have got things right in the past. Will we get things right once again? Remains to be seen. Thank you so much.